Day with Claire Byrne on RTE Radio 1.
Ireland's premier dog race, the Greyhound Derby, takes place this Saturday at Shelbourne Park. But ahead of the Blue Ribbon event, controversy over a junior cert activity book has reignited debate over the industry's welfare record and place in Irish society. In a moment, we'll discuss with the Chief Executive of the Irish Greyhound Board, Gerard Dollard, and Holly Cairns TD with the Social Democrats. But first, our reporter Barry Lenihan can take us through some of the issues at play. Good morning, Barry.
Claire, good morning.
So we all remember that damning RTE investigation in 2019 around the treatment of dogs. How has the industry responded since, and what are people telling you?
Yeah, and I'm talking to you this morning from Shelbourne Park, Ireland's premier greyhound track. And that investigation you mentioned, it uncovers the potential widespread culling of thousands of animals, up to 6,000 greyhounds a year, based on their performances. So these revelations, they came on top of a myriad of other controversies around governance, welfare, doping, as well as a downward slump in attendances and prize money and political pressure to stop state funding to the sport. But those who race greyhounds, today they argue the industry has turned a corner. It has made huge strides in animal welfare, they say, since that major RTE investigation in 2019. And they claim people are coming back to the sport, and they also say they're being unfairly singled out. This charge, after a new junior cert workbook included an exercise inviting students to consider the so-called problems with greyhound racing and encourage students to write to the Minister for Agriculture with ideas to protect the animals' welfare. Now, animal welfare campaigners, they've welcomed this move, but Damien Matthews, who's chairman of the Irish Greyhound Owners and Breeders Federation, he said the publication sought ways to marginalise the greyhound racing community. And for more on the sentiment from those in the industry itself, I've been speaking to Dublin owners and breeders Michael O'Keefe and first Alan Redmond.
We were certainly down in the dumps as a result of the programme that was aired on RTE. We were on our knees. But we're coming back again now. We lost a lot of our sponsors, and it looks as if we may get some of those sponsors back now.
Have events of recent years not done irreparable damage to the sport and to the industry?
If you were to say that, it would mean that we would give up on something that we love. What's going to happen is we will do everything we can to run this greyhound industry to the best of our ability. Look after our dogs, number one. This thing from the education board, that to me now that's another nail in the coffin. The things they're saying on that is ridiculous.
There was a report, was there not, as part of that primetime programme which they uncovered, which showed that dogs were going missing?
Yes, there was traceability, but it wasn't sufficient, and it wasn't good enough, and it wasn't properly managed. Now things have changed for the better, and from birth now, from the time the pup comes on until the time the pup is finished racing, we can trace it. Everybody can trace it as far as that goes. There was untold damage done to the industry as a result of that programme. We're looking to the future of the greyhound industry coming back up again.
What do you say to somebody who says, I don't want exchequer funding going to this industry?
Well, there'll be a lot of people out of employment. That's being honest. It'll cost a hell of a lot more than 16 million. I think we got 16.8 million. I think there'll be a lot of people unemployed. You'll always, no matter where you go, you'll always get the people giving out about something. I think they're picking on the doggy people.
We're getting all the stick. If they for 1 minute manage to put a stop to greyhound racing, the next then they'll take the next sport, and then they'll take the next sport, which will be rugby, because there's so many injuries in rugby.
What do you say to somebody who's on the fence or in the middle at the moment, who is undecided around greyhound racing after all the controversies and so on?
Yeah, well, I think quite honestly the first thing they should do is they should pay a visit to their local track. These people who are a little bit weary, they should go along and they should see the situation for themselves on the track. If necessary, there is no problem. Any trainer out there today who's training will have an open day where people can go along and visit his kennels. They'll see the type of treatment that those dogs get. Dogs are looked after like their children.
Dublin owners and breeders Michael O'Keefe and Alan Redmond there. So that's what those in the industry think, Barry, but what's the public perception more generally?
A report commissioned by the industry's governing body, Greyhound Racing Ireland, found public perception of the sport has been reflected in falling attendances, and it also pushed the falling crowd numbers down to, quote, the refusal of a number of media outlets to cover greyhound racing, most notably RTE. Now, this will be the second consecutive year RTE won't broadcast the sport's pinnacle from here behind me in Shelburne Park, this Saturday's Greyhound Derby, even though, according to correspondence I've seen, Greyhound Racing Ireland offered to bear the cost of the broadcast with no financial contribution needed from RTE. The national broadcaster, for its part, this morning says it's not showing the event due to competing editorial and production demands, and the decision isn't solely linked to the revelations in that 2019 investigation. But as for public sentiment towards the sport more generally, for people on the streets of Dublin, welfare was most important.
I've been there a few times, yeah, and it's been a bit of crack, but I don't have a support the dog racing, yeah. I think it's a little bit cruel, yeah, a little bit, and I have 2 dogs myself.
Good night out, though.
Yeah, it is a good night out, in fairness, but I don't know if it's supported.
And would you be deterred from going to it again then?
Probably not, I would say, yeah.
So there have been concerns raised previously, so would that deter you from going?
If the dogs were being mistreated, definitely, yeah, 100%.
And when trainers now say that they're making every effort, that they treat the dogs like their children, does that reassure you?
No, because there's always no smoke without fire, really, is there? So there must be some sort of an issue, like, you know what I mean?
Anyone who has dogs would look after them, especially there's that sort of money in it, especially with the bodies that are involved in it, they'd be checked on and regularly treated and stuff. I think it'd be alright.
And are you happy that Exchequer funding is going to the sport on an annual basis?
Probably wouldn't, no. I think there's enough money there in the tracks and stuff like that on their own, without getting support, I think.
I have no interest whatsoever in greyhound racing, I'm afraid.
Would you have a problem with it?
No, probably only the betting part of it. That would be a problem. The dogs, as long as they're well treated, I wouldn't have a problem.
It is worth a lot to the economy. That's the argument for it. Would that be an argument on the face of it that you would support?
No, not at all. I don't buy that kind of argument that something's worthwhile to the economy. I think we need to be going in a different direction in terms of the economy, in terms of sustainability and the environment. No, I wouldn't buy that argument at all.
I think it's a blood sport, essentially, and it should be banned. That's sort of my opinion on greyhound racing.
What do you have with you at the moment?
I have a lurcher. His name is Bailey, and this is a whippet, and her name is Rhea.
What of the argument that it's worth several million to the economy and over 4,000 full and part-time jobs?
I think it's a moral question. So I think, is the torture of animals worth the couple of million that it brings in? I think there's much better ways that we could potentially bring in a few million, but something else would be much, much better.
People in Dublin there, ending Barry Lenihan's report from Shelburne Park, and I'm joined now by Social Democrats TD for Cork South West and spokesperson on agriculture, disability and social justice, Holly Cairns, and Gerard Dollard, Chief Executive of Greyhound Racing Ireland. You're both very welcome to the programme. Gerard, I'll start with you. What are the changes made since that RTE Investigates programme in 2019?
Well, good morning, Claire. I think the changes were being made long in advance of the RTE programme, going back as far as the Welfare of Greyhounds Act in 2011, microchipping in 2016, our strategic plan which put welfare at the centre of our industry in 2017, and the start of the new Greyhound Racing Act which commenced in 2016 and was finally enacted in 2019. So a lot has been going on, I suppose, since the RTE programme. There has been the introduction of a new traceability system for the 1st of January of this year, where we can track and trace all racing greyhounds. Our rehoming figures are going through the roof. Over 1,300 greyhounds rehomed up to the end of July this year. I think this time last year we were around 900. We've opened a care centre. We have 5 foster care centres in place. We have a care fund where there's a dedicated fund for care and welfare issues. We have a confidential phone line. If people have a concern in relation to welfare, contact the phone line or the email and it will be investigated. And in terms of people within the industry, if you like, misbehaving, the board has been very strong in relation to issuing exclusion orders. There are 6 currently active and there are 7 more at various stages of the process.
Okay.
The result of an exclusion order means that somebody can't be involved in greyhound racing or attend the track.
So Holly Cairns, Gerard Dollard explaining there that the industry is taking action and has been for a number of years. It's pulling its socks up.
Yeah, well, Gerard just said there that the changes have been undergoing since 2011, but the documentary, the RTE Running for Their Lives one, was released in 2019, so obviously those changes didn't work. And ultimately, these changes are only necessary because of the poor standards in the industry. So the expanded inspections, injury support schemes and traceability systems only happened because of public pressure. This industry has shown evidence little evidence that it wants reform. It's only external pressure that works. So last year, the IDB spend on its Greyhound Care Fund increased more than 4 times, which is welcome, to 1.19 million, which means they had been spending a derisory 297,000 per year on animal welfare. So employment in the IDB last year reduced from 237 to 153, and its net staff cost bill reduced from 9.57 million to 5.59 million. So given the increase in funding of 2 million, given bringing the state funding to the industry to a staggering 19.2 million and vastly reduced staff numbers, I'd like to ask Gerard if again you'll be increasing the funding on animal welfare in the coming year.
Gerard?
Yeah, just to comment on a couple of those things there. I mean, I think we can go back in history. I think the important thing is where we are currently, and I would fully accept in relation to animal welfare generally, the public's attitude and the public's expectation has significantly changed over the last number of years. On the figures, I think Ollie is, I suppose, unfairly quoting figures. What she's comparing is a COVID year with a non-COVID year, and clearly in 2020, we were closed for a good part of the year. We weren't allowed to have attendances, so there would be a very significant reduction in commercial activity, which would lead to a reduction in income. And because of the reduction in income,
I suppose the substantive question is, though, are you going to increase the welfare spend?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the board is absolutely committed, and the board has said on numerous occasions, whatever happens, and during COVID, certainly our commercial business was completely eliminated, but the spend on care and welfare will not stop. I'll be going to the board next week to sign off on the purchase of a new laboratory machine, €150,000. The spend on care and welfare will not stop, and whatever needs to be done to show, I suppose, to the general public.
What's that machine for?
It's for the National Greyhound Laboratory. We purchased a machine in 2017. It cost about $400,000. We're continually updating the equipment so that our testing for doping medication, misuse of medication can be to absolutely the highest standard.
Okay. What's your issue with this educational book in secondary schools, which I know you say contains a passage which misrepresents the industry? Explain to us what that's about.
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of ways of looking at this, and I think first of all, from an educational perspective, and I think a number of secondary school teachers have made this point, that the CSPE programme is supposed to be part of the wellbeing approach in schools, and to give students who are becoming young adults the information, build their confidence, inform them in a balanced way. A topic like this, the way it's covered in such a misrepresented, one-sided approach, places students in the class who may be involved in the greyhound industry, or indeed their families will be involved in the greyhound industry, in a position where I think secondary school teachers take the view that it could give rise to bullying.
What does it say?
What it says really is it's a single page. It's an exercise about going to the dogs. It presents 5 problems, and I think the 5 problems are not problems. And then it concludes by asking the students to write to the Minister for Agriculture and the Minister for Tourism to suggest actions the government can take to improve welfare. I mean, from our point of view, it really amounts to propaganda, and it's totally inappropriate in a junior cycle curriculum.
Okay, and Holly Cairns, do you think that the greyhound industry has a right to object to this workbook? Because it does seem, from what Gerard has said, that it makes assumptions.
Claire, the class exercise invites students to consider problems with the greyhound racing industry. The opening statement says that greyhound racing is legal in Ireland. Many dogs seem to enjoy the chase and come to no harm, and that most dogs are cared for well. It goes on to discuss unsuccessful greyhounds, or those who are too old to race, being sometimes abandoned or even put down. It highlights the greyhounds bred in Ireland have green tattoo marks on both their ears to identify them, and says that some owners cut off dogs' ears when they abandon them so they can't be identified. And the pupils are encouraged to write to the Minister for Agriculture with ideas to protect animal welfare. So the class exercise sounds extremely balanced, and the GRI are complaining about this. So, is it the case that they want to censor any reference to animal cruelty in sport? Gerard, do you think that students should not watch investigations broadcast by Primetime and other current affair broadcasters into greyhound racing? Surely you agree that students should learn about topical political issues, and I think it's very concerning that the GRI would spend time complaining about an exercise for school students. It suggests that they won't accept any criticism from the industry, no matter how well-grounded or researched. And I think it's important to say that Folens, the authors of Make a Difference, are highly experienced educators and authors who have been teaching CSP for many years. The language they used in the section on greyhound racing is both measured and considered.
Okay.
And to think the GRI are unhappy about such a harmless exercise, it's a bit rich coming from an industry that's rapidly declining due to its own harmful practices. And we all know that state funding shields the industry from commercial reality. And it seems like now, Gerard, you want various departments like education to shield you from any kind of reality. But we all know...
Okay, I'll just let Gerard respond to that. Gerard Dollard.
Yeah, I think Holly has outlined what's in the textbook, and I think people should look at it for themselves. It is propaganda. It is totally one-sided. And Holly outlined earlier on...
It's very balanced.
Sorry, if I could respond, Holly outlined earlier on the positive measures that were being taken in traceability, care, welfare, etc. Look at the textbook. You will find none of that. Look at the textbook. You won't find a mention of the Welfare of Greyhounds Act 2011.
Gerard,
all of the problems that are listed have...
The documentary shows that 16,000 greyhounds are bred every year, and 6,000 of them are killed because they failed to make qualification time.
All right, we'll just Gerard finish his point, and I'll let you back in then, Holly, at the end. Go ahead.
Yeah, all of the problems that are listed in the textbook as problems have been dealt with, but there's nothing presented in the textbook in relation to the measures that have been taken and are in place to deal with what are being suggested as problems. And our key issue with this is this book was published in May 2021. People should have been much more aware of where the greyhound industry was in 2021 rather than what they've actually published in this book.
But it does say that most owners are responsible.
Yeah, I think, Claire, you can take half a sentence or a couple of words and say most owners are... You need to read the full page. It's clearly amounting to present a view of the greyhound industry, to put into students' minds that this is an appalling industry, and by the way, you need to write to 2 ministers to get government to take action in relation to this.
Have you had any response?
That's what the page is saying. We have had some engagement from Folan's. We are waiting for a response to our latest round of correspondence. We have taken it up with the Department of Agriculture, with our parent department, and we have asked that they would take it up with education. It's an issue that we're not going to let go of, because this type of material for a junior cert class who are formative young adults is entirely misrepresentative and inappropriate.
Okay, Holly, you wanted to come back in there.
Yeah, if, like Gerard said, the textbook highlighted some of the measures that have been taken in recent years by the Greyhound Board to address the animal welfare concerns, if those measures were weighed up against the finding of the RTE Running for Their Lives documentary, that exposed that 6,000 dogs are bred every year and found that 6,000 of those are killed because they failed to make qualification times or their performance has declined, and that the budget allocates a staggering 19.2 million to the greyhound racing industry. So basically, the industry kills almost 6,000 dogs annually for not racing fast enough. The government funds it. Attendance at greyhound racing tracks fell by 55% between 2008 and 2018.
Okay, and you made those points earlier. All right, I'm going to leave that there. Holly Cairns, Social Democrats TD, and Gerard Dollard from the Greyhound Racing Ireland Board, Chief Executive of that board. Thank you both very much indeed.
Email todaycb@rte.ie.